You're listening to Agency Alchemy, a podcast from Advertising Week. Join us as we sit down with top agency executives to uncover the secrets behind their success and explore how they're navigating the ever-evolving advertising landscape. From discussions around innovative strategies and emerging trends to effective leadership conversations, each episode offers invaluable insights into what it takes to thrive in today's evolving marketing world. If you like this podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review on your podcast platform of choice. And if you're looking for more content like this, check out our roster of podcasts available now on the Advertising Week Podcast Network at www.advertisingweek.com/podcasts. Thanks for listening. This episode of Agency Alchemy features a wide-ranging and eye-opening conversation with Paul Woolmington, CEO of Canvas Worldwide. As the agency celebrates its 10th anniversary, Paul dives deep into the evolving media landscape where sports, culture, and technology collide. From the global growth of women's sports to the streaming revolution reshaping fan access, Paul shares insights on how sport has become the new religion and a powerhouse platform for brands. Discover why Formula One exploded in the United States, how cricket shocked the world in Dallas, and what the 2026 FIFA World Cup and 2028 Olympics in LA mean for marketers. Whether you're a diehard fan or a data-driven strategist, this episode explores why sports are no longer just entertainment. They're an economic and cultural force. Paul Woolmington, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Richard, for having me. Really pleased to be here.
I'm pleased to have you. You were a guest some time ago on my boss's former show, Great Minds, and one of the more enjoyable episodes from his early seasons.
No, I love Matt. He's just one of the mentors. In fact, he invited me to an event tomorrow night, which I can't do because I got clients in town. And in the sporting theme, I'm going to go try and see the Knicks tomorrow night.
Excellent. I wish I had a winning basketball team in my area, but unfortunately that's never been the case. I'm over in Portland and yeah, we just can't seem to get there. But, welcome to the show. I'm sure most listeners are familiar with Canvas, but to kick things off, can you tell us about Canvas Worldwide in 2025 and what you're most focused on right now?
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Well, we're going to celebrate our 10th anniversary. I don't like anniversaries. That means we can celebrate every single day rather than and it's flown by. So we've actually got to a point where we're the second largest independent in the world. I think that's part of this theme. America is so large that you can be larger than any of the largest companies in Europe or Asia. We have about 550 employees. We've got 6 offices. And some amazing clients, very selective. We have a one canvas philosophy. So what am I doubling down on? We are doubling down on our culture. So 2 years in a row, we've been top 10 Ad Age Best Place to Work, one of the top agencies, which really gives me great pride. We were Campaign's US Agency of the Year, which is fantastic also. But culture is really the underpinning, I think, in an age of technology, AI, everything else. I liken that to the Ferrari, the F1 Ferrari. You just need amazing drivers. You can't be putting, a 23-year-old novice into a Ferrari F1. So it's about how humans are in harmony with the agentic age, with the AI age, with the technology age, which is very, very much present in our media lives. A couple of other superpowers. We are global, national, and local, which we might talk about in the sports context. Landing the plane into fandoms at a local level is kind of one of our passion points, even if it was for FIFA World Cup. another superpower would be data storytelling. So back to the human, that we are overwhelmed by data, overwhelmed by data. We're overwhelmed by data, but where are the insights? Where are the storytellers? So yeah, thank you, Richard. A few of our highlights.
Well, congratulations on 10 years. That's a lot to accomplish in what for some is a short span of time. I mean, personally, you had COVID in there at some point. So the past 10 years to me either feels like 10 minutes or 100 years. I'm still not quite sure. I'm kind of haven't quite caught up, but I'm glad you mentioned sports. And one of the things I really wanted to talk to you today is about sports.
Yeah.
Specifically, the U.S. sports market has expanded quite a lot in the past decade or so, with NFL games being played outside the U.S. itself. I know we were in Mexico City some years ago for one of our first LATAM events there, and we're all at the hotel, and the New England Patriots walk through the door, and you're thinking, why? What's going on here? And you see all these famous players, and you're like, what are they here for? Like some kind of celebration or something? Like, no, they have a game tomorrow. And you're like, oh, okay, well that's new. I wasn't aware of that. Not a Patriots fan myself. Based where I am, but nonetheless, it was pretty exciting to see. But those sports fans in the States now are also demanding an increased amount of sports programming from outside the usual. When I was growing up, it was baseball, basketball, and football, and you knew three people who paid attention to hockey. Now it's a lot of everything. You mentioned Formula One. Formula One is huge here now. Soccer, massive here.
Yeah.
But to what do you attribute this expansion and interest, I think, on both sides, both in the States and outside of it?
Yeah, it's a great question. We call it the Americanization of sport generally. And I think there's the in out and the out in. But to answer your question, I attribute it to an incredibly diverse America. It's a huge country. It obviously has grown up like the Galapagos a little bit with its own sports ecosystem. But that ecosystem is increasingly not Galapagos. It is actually, heading internationally. And also, we're made up. If you think of the minority being the majority currently and in the future, then obviously passion and fandoms really are global. This country is a petri dish of every but also, I think, so I would say, firstly, it's culturally, demographically. The second is access. We have never before seen more ability to access in a streaming world, access more and more content and more diversity of sports. And lastly, I would say it's show me the money, the famous quote from from Tom Cruise. It really is still the dominant economic marketing engine of the world, HQ for many global clients, the economic dollars that obviously sponsorships and the like can bring in America make it extremely attractive for the out in as well. So yeah, I put it down to those points, and I can dive into any one of them.
Well, yeah, let's do that. Let's start with just the streaming and the access. Back in the day, we had, broadcast television where, if you were lucky on weekends and some weeknights, you'd have a single channel that might be showing a sport. And then you had cable television where, maybe you had access to 3 or 4 sports simultaneously. And then streaming now is a whole new level because I believe I have subscriptions now where I can watch at least soccer, some other sports 24/7 if I wanted to. How important has that been? And I think further to that, going back a little bit, why didn't we see that type of expansion with cable alone? Was it just purely the limitations of the technology, or is it both that and demand?
Yeah, I think it's that perfect storm of technology meeting um, demand, meeting new players. And by new players, I don't mean the sports franchises. I mean people who obviously double down on NBC, for example. I'll give you one good example. Obviously, they historically didn't have as many of the franchise sports. So when the Premier League came up for bidding many years ago, they really doubled down on it. And I think you can point a finger at NBC being one of the having helped grow that sport. So I would say that was a need to obviously diversify their sports portfolio. At that point in time, they weren't able to, the pendulum has swung even on NBC, and we could come to that. But I use that as just one illustration. And then obviously we then had the acceleration of streamers and the multiplicity of platforms and forms in which you can consume. And that has obviously then, it was, and sped up. We all know it was multiplied under COVID because we were all sitting there. And of course, it was kind of a little bit of a sad sports experience because but certainly what we saw was the acceleration of the streaming technology and the adoption of streaming. So it's not just one dimension, but I think what has now economically been proven is that sport is, the last bastion of shared live experience. It is the one dominant area that is growing year on year in almost every franchise, from viewership and obviously the economics of it. And yes, to your point, it's now available in a multiplicity of places, whereas maybe the restriction of the dominance of the networks in the old days probably meant that it restricted to what they knew best, which were the great American sports, which are still very dominant, but now have also expanded. So what you've seen is great. Notwithstanding all of that, I do think that the viewer experience has obviously been enhanced in, whether it's statistics, whether it's gaming, whether it's, we know that 9 out of 10 people view any form of sport doing something else at the same time. So obviously that duality of how they consume, whether they're, streaming and on their mobile phone, et cetera, et cetera. But yes, it's really the advancement in platforms, technology meets demand, meets marketing. Everyone wants a bit of sport.
Oh, absolutely. On top of that, you had mentioned the money side of it, which brings me partially to that and partially to another question. All these games come with a price tag, and I assume that the broadcast and streaming rights for a lot of this must be pretty astronomical, certainly more than, I could barely afford to keep up with, all the various services I subscribe to, let alone, broadcasting anything or advertising during it. But you see these sort of almost like a paradigm shift in a way where, an Apple TV has completely taken over, streaming, and there is no real broadcast. I mean, there's a few broadcast games of Major League Soccer in the States. And, Formula One, I think, is absolutely top shelf when it comes to what they're doing in terms of streaming. I mean, their subscription model and what they provide you and all the data and statistics and interesting stuff. That's the one sport where when I am watching the races, I'm glued to their app at the same time. I'm not doing anything else, but it is, they have my undivided attention on two screens at once, which is pretty difficult to do, I would say. Where do you see that sort of going? And is that economically even possible, for example, for, some of the larger American leagues, an NFL, or if not an NFL, an NBA or a Major League Baseball, all of whom have similar packages, but don't necessarily have all the games. We still suffer from, blackout restrictions here and there, and, all these weird sort of throwbacks to the broadcast era.
Well, let me start by saying, it's a kind of sad statistic that, according to various pieces of research, people who might be on a very tight budget, one of the last things they are sacrificing is their subscriptions to streaming services or cable. That has exponentially grown, as we know, because obviously, and it's become very complex. So I almost feel like the super app would be the app that actually told you how you can watch your favorite team across every platform and how much it's going to cost you and what are the ins and outs of dropping in and out of sub services during the season, out of season, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I'm sure that super app does exist because everyone is kind of clamoring for. So yes, we're going through this painful evolution, aren't we? The painful evolution is very painful for local TV stations because of obviously their cable. We've seen an erosion in obviously cable cutting. You've seen an erosion in the power that they had in their local communities because they were able to, let's say, have exclusive rights to certain sports teams that were in the local market. A lot of that is being disintermediated, so we start there. Then obviously you add on the layer of network broadcasting, which obviously you're right. In the old days, they were very dominant. There might be a couple of players that would carve up the season, maybe even, and now obviously the opportunity for the NFL to have literally 7 or 8 partners with different games, with the streamers, with obviously different economic models they can build into it. So it has become a very, very complex. But back to what I said earlier, a kind of sad statistic is it's one of the last things that people will sacrifice. I mean, I hate a statistic that says they might actually scrimp on food that they buy in a supermarket because they still want to buy there. They want that extra package that buys them, access to whatever it is, the Kansas City Chiefs or the Milwaukee Bucks or the Champions League football that you can only get with a subscription from X or Y. So it is a little bit of a, it is a complicated equation. I think some of the broadcasters are trying to clearly leverage. NBC is another good example. Obviously, you have NBC cable, you obviously have NBC, you have USA Network, you have Peacock, and obviously they will stream at different times on different combinations. So sometimes you're actually pivoting from literally an NBC broadcast, and then if you don't have the subscription, to Peacock, then you're kind of scrambling. But the demand is there, and what we're seeing is obviously. It's been a big part of obviously Amazon and Apple. They have very different economic models. They can amortize an investment in a sports franchise in a way that a Paramount can't, that a Time Warner can't, that, an NBC has to be really careful. Its ecosystem is not a retail ecosystem like Amazon. So, yes, we're only probably in the second innings of where that's going to go. But ultimately, I think the sports leagues and franchises have to also think about at what point do they have a public duty to obviously make local sports available at a local level, national sports, and to optimize the total cumulative audience. So what we're seeing is the cumulative audience is growing, with streaming, in addition to the networks, in addition to local. But at some point, there could be a backlash. And I think that that's something the leagues have to very carefully consider. So, it's a complicated world we live in today, especially if you're a sports fan following multiple leagues and multiple different sports. You might have to have as many as 3 or 4 subscriptions on top of maybe a cable sub.
Yeah, it's interesting that you raise that. I mean, one of the things that you see in sort of other television streaming, you have Netflix moving to, we have an ad-supported tier. Amazon has an ad-supported tier and had an entire network of ad-supported programming one time that I think they just folded back into the main Amazon Prime Video umbrella. The sports, on the other hand, it's not lost on me that I'm paying Apple for this MLS subscription, but I'm still seeing ads. So there isn't a next level where we can take the ads out because what are you watching otherwise? You hit halftime, you got 15 minutes of what? So, your contention that, maybe there is I don't know, a place and time where we land on the local teams being, maybe a different cost than if I want, the extended league is super interesting to me because it's funny how people will sort of scoff at a Netflix with ads, but they'll go ahead and subscribe to something with all the sports and continue to consume the ads. Which brings me to the advertising part of this. What sort of opportunities do you think this expanded interest in sports presents to brands, particularly the expansion of the sheer number of different sports that, 30 years ago you wouldn't have seen here in the States?
I embrace it, and I think it's one of the most exciting ages in sports marketing or sport as a platform for marketeers. Um, and I'll try and break it down if I can. Well, first, I think is um, the fandom and the live aspect of sport is obviously very appealing to marketeers. Um, and we actually, in our sports report, talk a little bit about sport is the new religion. I think it's kind of always been a somewhat of a religion. But when you look at, I'll give you a few statistics. I mean, women's sport is growing exponentially, 78% growth in viewership year on year, 28% growth in telecasting. So there's such an appetite there, but also that in an ad-supported environment, the women and or just viewers of women's sport are saying they're 25% more passionate and engaged in that sport because it's probably truly representative of an underrepresented group, women generally in sport. And what we're seeing is that, the ad impact is growing. So, the cost of entry into women's sport is obviously a lot less than the cost of entry into the NFL. So I think it's giving access to more advertisers, as sport diversifies. So you don't have to be, one of the giant billion-dollar marketeers who can afford to, be a prime sponsor of, the what I would call the Division One sports. You now have a multiplicity, and also demographically, it changes. You've got obviously different demos. From Rugby World Cup to T20 to cricket. Can you believe it? We actually had the cricket T20 World Cup here in Long Island in Dallas last year. Very different profile. I mean, obviously, Champions League, the entry prices. So now what we have is, tiered entry prices. So you don't have to feel like you're missing out because you just can't afford to be, participating in an NFL ticket.
Yeah, when it comes to those brands that are seeing benefit from all this different sports programming, is there any that stand out to you as being particularly surprising? Just in terms of, what has worked, and paired with which sport?
Yeah, the big surprises I think are, um, I, I'm not surprised about women's sport. I'm so encouraged. So, I'm not going to fudge the answer. I am so encouraged that it is growing exponentially, that obviously the triangle of marketeers, uh, broadcasters and the leagues, and obviously private investment money, private equity money, celebrity money has come in to really boost women's sports because I've been a fan of women's sport, and to see it grow and to see it becoming a marketing platform. The surprises, I would say, um, I was really surprised at Formula One. I grew up, I mean, with this accent, I lived in America for many, many years. I'm a fully signed up American. But Formula One, after Drive to Survive, Netflix, we owe or Formula One owes a lot to that surprise hit. A lot of the teams didn't play in those first two seasons. If you remember, the big teams didn't. It was the smaller teams, and then suddenly this juggernaut came along, and then clearly also the economics of the money in America. We have 3 Formula One Grand Prix now. We don't just have one. No other country in the world has more than one. And some of these countries are fanatics on F1, and we by no means are fanatics in the US. But there is a growing appreciation and understanding and excitement, even though the American driver got relegated out of his team, and we don't have an American driver. But even despite that, it really is a global sport that's really, so that's a surprise. It's had some ups and downs since that explosion about 4 years ago. It dipped a bit because I think it wasn't as competitive, but I think it's growing. There's a lot of youth. There's kind of glamour. There's global. Traveling around the world. I see that as being a bit of a surprise. A weird one I'm going to give you. I was absolutely surprised that T20, which is a world cricket tournament, came to the US. And the surprise, I was actually at a big conference around the topic with, it's, by the way, a little unknown fact. Cricket is the second most viewed sport in the world.
Wow.
Um, but there is a caveat. It's because India and Pakistan make up a huge. So we think that if we get about 100 was it just about 115 million viewers to Super Bowl, is kind of record. Uh, uh, a India-Pakistan game that they can't play, by the way, in either of their countries because they're nuclear powers and they kind of are fierce adversaries. When it's played, 700 million people will watch it live, but the vast bulk of them in India and in Pakistan. Anyway, so there's a little bit of a fudge there. Yeah, I mean, it's fine. It's a huge sport in the world, but no, and it came to Long Island. And the other surprise was the US. We were at the conference and the US team beat Pakistan.
Wow.
It was, I think they were in Dallas. It was being played and there was a panel. I remember we were at the City Winery in New York City and there was all these powerful sports agents and everyone else saying, cricket's coming to America. And this guy jumped out of his skin during the panel and he said, America just beat Pakistan. No, so those are a couple of little surprises. I guess the other, I'm not surprised. I'll pivot to one big item, and I think that is how America, Mexico, and Canada are going to share the FIFA World Cup next year. It's going to be very interesting. Three countries. I think we have 11 cities in the US, 3 in Mexico, and 2 in Canada sharing the World Cup. And it's going to be so exciting. It's going to be so. But I'm just kind of trying to envisage what these crowds are going to look like in, when the World Cup is played in New Jersey. Can you believe it? New Jersey finally is going to be, world famous because we're playing the FIFA World Cup final will be played, I think, on something like July 19th next year in New Jersey. Go on, New Jersey,
Yeah. My hometown, Seattle, and we're getting, I think, 4 matches total. Yeah. They're thrilled. I mean, they're absolutely thrilled. The whole city is.
Yeah. I know. And I think there's going to be great excitement. I think that's going to be another boost to soccer in the US. I think it will benefit MLS. You bet your bottom dollar that, David Beckham will be sitting there and various of the luminaries. And obviously the spin-off on all of that is going to be, we know that this country is changing demographically. So, notwithstanding, obviously, the huge Hispanic support around soccer, it's going to obviously grow. Everybody I know over the last decade, I've been, literally over the weekends, I get texts from American friends across the board, that I work with, friends of mine who support, Premier League teams or La Liga teams or, or otherwise. And, it's just grown and grown and grown. So, and by the way, not at the expense of the NFL or the MLB or NBA. They're all going as well because they're going. So this point about in out and out in is working, across the economic spectrum.
Well, when it comes to that, how can brands make sure then that they're targeting the right consumers through the right sports? I mean, that seems like a pretty difficult thing to sort of navigate with all of this relatively new choice that they have.
Yeah, I think, well, obviously, I'm trying not to be overly generic. I mean, it all boils down to your objectives. You should start with, obviously, a business objective. I mean, clearly, we're in the world of commercial creativity, commercial commercial application of marketing spend. So there isn't really a generic answer. But what I would say is there are certainly lessons. It's obviously deciding a good fit. Is this a short term? I mean, obviously you can buy into sport and you can buy eyeballs and you can buy audiences. So obviously that's very much a part of advertising. So I would say The right sport, the right time, the right place, with the right viewing and at the right price is always going to be a consideration if obviously you're a media agency advising clients. But I think if you're looking for a longer term, what is the longer term fit for sports? If you're thinking of obviously platforms, what is the demographic? What is the growth potential? What is the potential to, for that sport to be flexible to your marketing needs? How do you activate it? How do you 360 it? Dare I say, it isn't just about you could be a sponsor, but then what's your advertising content? What's your personalized content? What might be your local activations off that? We're very proud to be able to obviously have 6 offices. We've got clients that we have at a global level, but then we have clients who have national activities. But in all instances, we're actually also pulling it all the way through down into fandoms at a local level. Yes, we all love the NFL, but do we really love the NFL? We love teams in the NFL. We're passionate, and that comes back to the religion. These can be transcendent experiences and affinities. The other thing I think that is interesting as a phenomenon in a world that seems more divided, where there are more political divides, et cetera, sport is still one of the great bastions of being neutral. If you're a Kansas City Chiefs fan, you can be in the stadia and you can be hugging and celebrating and in the pregame and online with people of every disposition. And it is a kind of, it almost cuts across political and other potential divides. And that I think is quite a good thing for marketing. You do want to tap into those fandoms and what it really means. And I think that is about taking a longer term perspective, buying the eyeballs, which is obviously very important. You can do that, but it's thinking about ways in which you can fully integrate into the passion of the fandom and really create advocates, out of that fandom, and be appropriate, turn up in an appropriate way, turn up in a passionate way, turn up where you help fans, where you embrace fans, where you activate fans. I think all of those things were always true, but I think will be even more true because as the dollars increase, you're going to have to squeeze more out of the value out of those sponsorships and or commitments.
This is super interesting, and I couldn't agree with you more about the near religious part of it, if not fully religious part of it. I was at a women's soccer game yesterday here in Portland, Oregon, and the stadium was packed, and I've never been in a louder sports stadium in my life. I mean, it was just absolutely crazy.
Yeah, no, it's so exciting, and I love going to lots of different sports because you get so many different experiences. But what's common is what I call the collective effervescence. I love that word, the collective effervescence, and it can be the collective, But look, we don't all support winners, What I have a incredible empathy and love of is the fandoms that aren't necessarily the winning teams, and yet they find a reason to turn up. It is it is AKA religion. There are a lot of parallels: the rituals, the mythology, the sacred spaces, the communal experiences, the pilgrimage. I'm using kind of somewhat religious language, but going to a revered stadium, if you can't go, let's say you live far from your hometown, but you go back, it's your pilgrimage back to that stadium, but ultimately it's that communal experience, and increasingly technology allows us that communal experience. You were pointing it out. I think a lot of people watch sport in a communal, even if you're in your living room, and you maybe not with your friends and family, you can still feel that communal spirit by being part of a digital online community that's actually viewing at the same time. So it's kind of huge. It's huge, and it's growing, and it's getting more complex, and navigating, having the Sherpa that can navigate through the sports terrain now is much, much more complex. As you were saying, I just looked it up. The NFL has 7 broadcast partners now.
Wow.
7 broadcast partners. It's incredible how it's expanded. Um, Back to what we were originally saying.
Yeah. Wow. No wonder I can hardly ever find the games. It used to be, Sunday at 1 or Sunday at 10 on the West Coast. That was where your NFL was. And now it's well, no, this is Thursday night. No, that's Monday night. No, it's Saturday. No, it's 3 in the morning because it's in, Germany, whatever. You're just kind of like, all right, well, they're my team. I'll get up. It's fine.
So I think the Americanization of sport is down to obviously availability, economics, and the diversity of America, but also the diversity of the world. So it is unquestionable that the NFL, NBA, MLB, and others are looking for global expansion. We clearly see the NFL playing in London, Mexico City, Frankfurt, Munich, Brazil, and I think to come Madrid. But also how the teams all sponsor countries. So, pre-games, it's really diverse. You've got similarly MLB, the NBA, who are also playing official games, but unofficially, doing great business. The MLB, record-breaking audiences turned up for the games in Japan. It's Asia, particularly Japan, Korea, places like that are absolute, huge markets and growth markets for MLB. Over and above, pre-seasons where they'll go to, their pre-season they're going to India. There's a parallel with actually statistics. A lot of people are very confused about cricket, and I go, well, when I first came to America, I was confused about, baseball. I was at the Yankees game on Friday. I love baseball now, and it's a game of stats, and it's, it's different, but it's very similar to cricket. It's, got a lot of parallels. And, I see that growth. But then you've got the out in, you've got FIFA World Cup coming. You've got Canvas worked on we were one of the agencies that worked at the beginning, actually 2016, on LA's bid for the Olympics, and of course it was originally going to be 2024, and we now have it in 2028. You've got FIFA, you've got F1. We talked about it. Three Grand Prix in the US, when no other country in the world has more than one. You've got cricket, you've got literally Rugby World Cup, you've got NFL, you've got Peacock are showing rugby games. It's got a higher demographic profile. The US has got actually a great rugby heritage, but it's been, probably number 12 on sport. But men and women play it in colleges.
Yeah.
They play it in every college, or every major college has a rugby team. And it's an amazing sport. But all of that said, it just shows the power of the economic might of the American marketing economy, and obviously everyone wanting a bit of that. Show me the money. Everyone wanting a bit to show the money.
Paul, this has been absolutely fantastic. I love talking about sports, but moreover, I love talking to you about sports. This has been highly educational. I thank you so much for taking the time. If one wanted to find out more about, Canvas and particularly the Americanization of global sports, you said you had a report. Where would they go?
Yeah, so if you go to our website, it's canvasworldwide.com. The report is available there. And maybe if you would allow it, maybe we put a link into the interview, and we can do that. We update the report throughout the year. So the latest report coincided. We actually launched it at New Orleans at the Super Bowl. We updated it for the beginning of the MLB season, and we will be doing a Cannes Lions edition, which will have some fabulous new chapters in it, including a big in-depth look at LA 2028 and FIFA World Cup, which will obviously, we'll start that countdown. It will be a year almost to that we'll be hosting the first games. We're going to add a few new chapters. We're going to do a chapter we're really excited by, and it's woven through, but we're going to look at sport and technology, and obviously the application of AI in the viewer experience, but also in the, how marketeers are using AI around sport, personalization in sport, and various other things. So yes, canvasworldwide.com is our website, and we'd love to provide you with a link. And it's an easy read, 10 chapters, a lot of pithy topics. The whole report is about 80 pages, but literally you could pick one of your topics and it's, a 5-minute read. And I think you'll have a bit of fun with it. We said we didn't want one of those Deloitte white paper reports. We wanted Canvas meets Vanity Fair meets Fast Company meets sport.
Well, we'll put a link to it in the podcast description to make sure that's there. And then that way, people who are watching sports can have their, extra something to do while they're watching.
There we go. Yeah. Well, listen, yeah, well, Richard, you are absolutely great. Thank you so much. Love Advertising Week. Matt Schechner is one of my all-time favorite human beings. So, always a pleasure to partner with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Agency Alchemy, a podcast from Advertising Week. If you like this podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review on your podcast platform of choice. And if you're looking for more content like this, check out our roster of podcasts available now on the Advertising Week Podcast Network. You'll find it at www.advertisingweek.com/podcasts.